everyone, welcome to today's tutorial. If you have ever worked with multi-threading in Java, you have probably used ThreadLocal to store data for thread. But did you know that ThreadLocal can lead to memory leaks and it is not optimized for modern concurrency models like virtual threads? With Java 24, we get a powerful new features, scope values. Scope values solve many of the issues we may face with ThreadLocal. It basically offering automatic cleanup, like no more memory leaks. It's provide the immutable values so that your code it's actually safer, and other than this, it's also perform better other than to the thread locals. It's basically ideal for virtual thread. So in this tutorial we will break down scope values step by step, like why scope values were introduced, how they work with real world examples, performance comparisons with thread local, best practices, and when to use them. By the end of this tutorial you will have a solid understanding of how scope values can improve your Java applications. So let's go through the next slide so that I will cover most of the thing in the next slide. So now, like before going to the detail of this scope values, just try to understand that what I am going to cover in this tutorial. First of all, we will talk about that what is scope values. Okay, what the problem that we faced while using that thread local, right? So before this Java 24 basically that scope value is not introduced, so that time we have mostly used that thread local. So what problem we were faced using the thread local, that we will also talk about. Next we will talk about the implementation of scope values, advanced uses of the scope values, performance analysis, and then we will walk through some real world app example where I will write some applications or program where we will introduce these scope values, and also we will talk about that how we are going to achieve the same using the thread local. So that I am going to cover in this today's tutorial. Now we will talk about the introductions to scope values. So as I said that scope values basically in Java 24 are designed to provide a safer and more efficient way of managing thread specific data without manual cleanup operations. They enable a context sensitive values binding that ensure variables are available only during the specific execution context. These scope values basically introduced under this Java 24 because like it's introduced to overcome the limitation that we faced while using the thread local, which often led to memory leaks and safety issues. These versions offers developers enhanced tools for managing temporary data specific to application context such as web request. If we talked about the purpose of scope values is to simplify the handling of context specific data while improving performance and memory uses. They are particularly useful in modern Java applications that utilize virtual thread and asynchronous processing. So this is the overall the things of that scope values, how it is different using the like this that we using before Java 24, that is thread local, how we are getting more performance while we are using these scope values. Okay, so let's going forward. So here basically we are going to talk about the difference from this thread local, like as this scope values basically introduced, so how it is different from the thread local. So we have categorized in three portions, like performance wise, memory management wise, and how it is thread safety. Okay, so if we talked about the performance improvement, so obviously the scope values provide significant performance improvements over ThreadLocal by eliminating the overhead of manual cleanup. They are optimized for uses in environment with high concurrency, resulting in faster execution and reduced resource consumption. Now we will talk about the memory management. So in this category, that ThreadLocal, which basically requires to removal of prevent memory leaks. Basically whenever you're going to use, so we need to remove manually, we need to remove those things, okay, to prevent memory leaks. But scope values basically automatically clean up their bindings at the end of the execution context. So this automatic management reduces the risks of unintended memory retention and reduces developer overhead. Obviously it is one of the manual overhead that we need to clean up for the ThreadLocal, which is basically removed or automatically taken care with these scope values. Now if we talked about the thread safety, so these scope values inherently basically designed to work seamlessly with virtual thread. They avoid the complications associated with managing shared mutable state, providing a more robust solution for storing context within concurrent applications. Okay, so this is the things that difference from the ThreadLocal if we talked about the scope values. Next we will talk about that what problem we may face with the ThreadLocal. Okay, so now let's see one example that here if you see, so this example basically so this is the example. Okay, so here we see that using this new ThreadLocal we have created this context, and here in the main here we are setting this one and then printing the data, and finally we need to remove this, okay, so that prevent the memory leaks. Okay, so here basically this ThreadLocal uses before the Java 24. This is illustrated how this static ThreadLocal variable must be manually managed. It's basically failure to call. If we fail to call this removed one, so it can lead to memory leaks, and thread retains reference to its data even after it is no longer needed, right? So if we are not forgot to write this statement, then it will cause the memory leak. So here certain advantage or disadvantages over here, like ThreadLocal provides a straightforward way to create thread specific variables, making it easier for developers to manage state in multi-thread applications. The disadvantage wise, if we say that drawbacks include need to manual interventions to manage this remove the data from this context, else it will cause the memory leaks, and its unsuitability for virtual threads or scenario when short-lived context such as HTTP request. Okay, now we will talk about the memory leaks and the safety issues. So this how this misuses occurs. So misuse of the ThreadLocal typically occurs when developers forgot to call this removed after finishing using a ThreadLocal variable, leading to memory leaks. This is especially troubling in environments where threads are reused, such as applications servers. Implications of mismanagement. So the implications of mismanagement can be severe, causing increased memory consumption and degraded application performance. This can lead to cascading failures if the applications run out of the memories, resulting in major downtime. Now we will talk about that implementations of the scope values, so how we are going to implement this one. Okay, so here if you see, for creating the values, basically we need to create a new scope values instance using this scope value dot new instance. Then we are going to bind a value for a defined scope using the scope value dot where. Here basically we need to provide the context and the value. Okay, so execute the dependent logic inside this run method. This method you are seeing over here, method which maintains access to the scope values. Okay, so that means this scope value is bounded to these portions only. Access the bound value safety within the corresponding here, right? Corresponding getter, correct? The basic implementation of this scope values begins with defining the new scope. The value is bound within a specific context using this where, that syntax one, scope value dot where, and it is accessed through this user context dot get within the bounded block. Next we will talk about the advantages of using scope values. So the one of the advantage is the automatic cleanup. Like here in the previous example, if you notice that let me show you. So here basically we don't maintain any any kind of cleanup activities over here, right, in this example. But in case of ThreadLocal, we have manually we need to use the remove method so that it will clean up. But here we are not using any kind of manual intervention, is not there. So this is the one of the main advantages, that automatically it will clean up the resources. Okay, so that means we don't need to write any boilerplate code over here, and we can also avoid the potential errors. Okay, and another one is the immutability and the safety. So scope values are basically immutable, meaning their values cannot be changed once it is set, thus avoiding accidental modifications. This immutability ensures that the data remains consistent throughout its uses within the defined context. If we talked about the advanced uses of the scope values, so in the next slide I'm going to cover over here. So here if you see that this is the top one, under that we are using the nested context, right? Okay, so here if you see that using the nested scope values shows how an outer scope, this outer scope values can be overridden by this inner scope one, right? This pattern actually allows for complex context management within a single execution flow. It's offering flexibility in value scope, right? So if you see the output over here, this is the admin for the outer one, and this is for the inner user, that is guest, means the inner scope is override the top user. Okay, the output demonstrates that the outer scope values can remain available while the inner scope can modify the value locally. This behavior illustrates how scope values support local overrides without affecting parent scopes, maintaining clarity in context management. Okay, now if we talked about the real-world applications, so in web applications, especially those built with framework like Spring Boot, tracking the currently authenticated user per request is essential. Scope values provide a clean way to bind user context data to individual requests, ensuring both safety and the efficiency, right? And also we can transitions from to the ThreadLocal to the scope values, like transitions, like if we want to move from the ThreadLocal to scope values, is basically involve restructuring our code to use the new management system. So developer will find that utilize scope values leads to cleaner, less error-prone code and eliminates many of the pitfalls associated with the ThreadLocal misuse. Okay, so now actually we'll talk about the performance wise, we will differentiate that how it is better than the ThreadLocal. So comparison with the ThreadLocal benchmark demonstrate that scope values outperform ThreadLocal in both speed and the resource utilizations. The eliminations of manual cleanup and automatic context management result in lower latencies and improve the throughput in concurrent application. Benefit for concurrencies. Scope values bring significant benefits for concurrency as they are designed to work seamlessly in environment with multiple threads. Their lightweight usage model allows for higher scalability and reduces contentions between threads starving and for shared resources. Okay, so this is the like kind of benefit. Okay, and other than this, like we can say about that when to use these scope values. Obviously, like ideal case to use this one, like whenever we are going to include managing temporary data such as user sessions, request tracing informations, and security context within applications. They are particularly beneficial where data validity is tied to the lifecycle of web request. But there are certain limitations, like scope values are not suitable for global state management. They are designed for transient context and should not be used where data persists beyond the immediate scope, which can lead to undesired behavior. Okay, now what will be the key points we can take from over here? Like basically there are certain key points that basically that's simplifying the concurrency management. Scope values simplify the concurrency management by abstracting away of the complexities associated with the ThreadLocal and manual memory management. They lead to cleaner code and more efficient resource usage. We can also replace this ThreadLocal with this Java 24 new features, that is scope values effectively replace the ThreadLocal in most scenarios, providing a modern, efficient alternative for handling thread-specific data in Java applications. Their adoptions in encourage for better software design practice. So next, what I will do, like I will create one demo-wise application in Eclipse where I will write one program and I will show you that how we are going to defining the scope values and how we are going to getting the data. Okay, so let's just look it out, and if you guys still have anything, please do let me know in the comment section. So to demonstrating this scope value, first of all you need to install Java 24 into your system. As you can see, I have created one Spring Boot application. If you see the pom.xml where we need to add all the dependencies, also we need to defining the Java version. So here if you see that we are defining the Java version as 24, means you need to install Java 24 into your local. So this is the prerequisite. Without this you are not able to access the Java 24 related features. Okay, next I am adding this Java 24 as a JRE over here. Okay, and then created this example, that is scope value example. So what we did basically over here, first of all we need to define these scope values. How we are going to defining? So for that, public static final, then scope value. Here we need to defining the what type of value we need to store, then user context, and then scope value dot new instance. It is basically create the one instance of these scope values. Okay, next we need to set the value under this where dot run. Okay, so here if you see scope value dot where is the context, we are passing this value, and then under this run method we are printing the value over here, like this is the main thread user, this is one. Okay, this is the child tasks. We are doing some kind of concurrency activities over here, and here also we are going to get the data from the context because it is under this bounded context, right? This context, it is the bounded to this one, so over here we can get the values for this bounded context. Now let's say if we try to access the same value outside of this context, then what it will happen actually. So that's why before going to get the data outside of the context, we need to check that context is it bound or not. If it is in bound, then we can say that we are able to get the data outside of the scope, but here this will be not the true because it is the outside of this scope, right? So that's why this will be called that outside of the scope and the scope value is not available. Now if we run this application here, so we can get the output details. So if you see that main thread, this is the user, task 1 and this task 2, and this is scope value is not available because we are trying to access the scope value outside of this particular scope, right? So that's why this is scope is not accessible to the outside of this one. If we are not using this checking, then it will give us the exception that it is not able to access the value outside of the context. Okay, now before the Java 24 we are basically use the ThreadLocal. So how we are going to doing that? So for that we need to defining the object of this ThreadLocal using this is the line. Okay, so ThreadLocal, this is the type of things that we are going to store user context and use this new ThreadLocal. And here we are setting the details as the name, then we are printing the data from the user context.get, and then finally we need to remove the context data, because this is very important. If we are not going to remove this, then it will basically cause the memory leak. Okay, so this is we can use to prevent the memory leak. Now if we run this application, so it will print the user details from username basically, because it will within this boundless context. Okay, so this is overall the things about this scope values, that how this scope value we are going to use into our application. Hope it's clear now. You are able to understand that how scope values help us to doing the context kind of activities without manual interventions of the lots of things, right? It will improve the performance. We can easily get the data from the context. We can get the set the data those values when we are going to use these scope values already I covered. Still, if you guys have anything, please do let me know in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe my channel. Please press the bell icon for further notification. Thank you for your time. See you in my next videos. Bye bye.